So if you've ever thought about getting a Leica or a street photography type of camera, you've probably considered getting a 35mm lens. And today we're gonna be talking about the offerings from a legendary lens manufacturer, Zeiss, looking at their 35mm ZM lenses for the Leica M mount. This video isn't sponsored by Zeiss, but most of these lenses are on loan to me from Zeiss, so thank you to them for making this possible. Now, one of the things they didn't lend me actually is this 35 Distagon. This is my own personal copy. This is not a native lens hood. It's an aftermarket one that I will link below. So this is the camera without the lens hood, and this is the camera with it. And if you have watched my video on the 35 Distagon, you will see my sort of relationship with this lens. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but you know, if you wanna see more in depth, you can check that video out. Now, I don't have the other two with me, but obviously I did test them a bunch. I'm making this talking head portion of the video after I unfortunately had to send the 35s back. But Zeiss has three different 35mm lenses. We have the 35 2.8, we have the 35 f2, and then we have the 35 1.4, all in varying degrees of size, weight, and price. Now it's funny because the 35mm 2.8 is never one that I have really considered. Basically any lens that is going to be a prime lens, I'm always assuming that lens is going to be an f2 or faster, unless it's like an extreme wide or an extreme telephoto. That being said, as I was kind of doing this video and going through some of these images, I realized that I love the X100V, and that is a 23mm f2 lens on a crop sensor body, which sort of gives you the same look as a 35mm 2.8 lens. So kind of funny how I just think that like, oh, that lens is sort of unusable, but then I love the look of that other lens. So it's one of those things that I sort of got over myself with as I was working through this video. Now I got these lenses in the middle of wedding season and actually brought all three of them on a trip where I had multiple weddings in one weekend. And one of the issues I noticed was that one of my Leica M10s started having an issue with the shutter, where at high shutter speeds, I was starting to get some darkening at the bottom of the frame, meaning that I'm assuming my shutter's going out, so that camera is on its way to Leica right now. RIP my wallet. But it actually gave me sort of like the creative opportunity, I guess you would say. Instead of just taking a lens like this and stopping it down to 2.8, I took the Zeiss 35mm f2.8 and used it as is, because 2.8 is the max aperture of that lens anyway. So I just made some pretty basic, boring test shots here, going from the max aperture down to 2.8. So here we have the Distagon at 1.4, at f2 and f2.8. I mean, it looks really good, right? The Bygone wide open at f2, a little bit softer, a little bit of chromatic aberration, definitely gets better. The Bygone 2.8 looks really great, but you can see that it has a significant amount less depth of field. But overall, I mean, they're all really great lenses. So as with most of the other Zeiss lenses, I found all of these to be really great performers. I think the most popular one is going to be the Bygone 35 f2. It's just a really great size, weight, performance. I think the 35 f2 is just kind of like the perfect lens for a Leica for most people. It balances really well. It's just kind of like the perfect amount of separation from a subject, light gathering, all that kind of stuff. Now I will say, if you are new to the rangefinder system, an f2.8 lens is not a bad thing to have. A lot of people really struggle when they first pick up a rangefinder just because it's such a different experience. And I know a lot of people, myself included, grabbed a 35 1.4 when we first started on these things and realized that it's not exactly as easy as it looks to nail focus at 1.4. So honestly, especially if you're doing street stuff or landscapes or some documentary stuff that you don't think is going to be needing low light, The 2.8 can be really great because it's so small and compact, but overall I think that 35 f2 Biogon is going to give you the most kind of like classic Zeiss look, as well as like size, weight, cost, all that kind of stuff. Now, the 35 1.4 is sort of the outlier in a few different ways. First of all, it's basically double the size of the other lenses, which for me, I know we talk about this a lot on my channel at least, size, weight, the carry of a camera, all that kind of stuff matters quite a bit to me. And while I do love this lens and I love everything about it, that one aspect of it, the physical nature of how big this is definitely a massive downfall. And it's one of the reasons that I stopped using it as much in my professional work and sort of have started to rely a lot more on my 28 Summicron. That being said, I have taken this to a bunch of weddings where I normally was going to plan on using the 28s and just stuck with the 35, and there is just something about a 35mm at 1.4 that I get why I shot that lens and that focal length for so long, and it's something that I do miss. With the 35, you're getting a medium wide perspective. It's gonna be something that's natural. Things towards the edge of the frame aren't gonna be distorted. It's gonna just be a very complementary look to most things. But then you add the pop you get from a 1.4 lens on a full frame camera, and especially on images that are in landscape or even some like tighter-ish full body maybe, but pretty close. It gives you a very like 3D kind of look that you don't really get with many other options. And so in terms of overall image quality, this lens, dollar for dollar, is definitely one of the best buys I think that there are out there in the Leica M system. I've definitely used this lens and the 35 Summilux before, and I would be hard pressed to have someone shoot both those lenses side by side and be like, oh my gosh, the Summilux is so much more worth the money in terms of the image quality. But I would be lying if I said that I have not continually considered buying the Summilux just because of the weight. It's one of those things where I just don't bring this lens out with me because it is so big. But when I have it for professional shoots, it's totally worth having around. So that's sort of where the Biogon comes in. I think it's a really great lens. I loved carrying it around. It's not the smallest, most compact lens there is. The Voigtlander 35 Ultron version 2 also is a very small lens and much smaller. I will say that I like the rendering out of the Zeiss better because it's just more of like a neutral look, but the Biogon is definitely not a lens where I at least personally had an issue carrying it around in terms of size. All the lenses are great. It just comes down to a lot more about how much you need that extra light, but also the added size and weight. So thanks again to Zeiss for sending these out. It's been fun to check out lenses that I've been looking at for the last 10 years and actually, use them side by side. So if you have any questions about these, let me know in the comments down below. As well, you can also leave any questions you have possibly for my video on the 50mm lenses that are gonna be coming out soon. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all on the next one.